Once again, it's time for movie reviews. This is Pure 24/7 Radio, and I'm Nathan Thomas, and I'm so delighted to be joined once again by my good friend Andy Godfrey. Hi, Andy.
Hey Nathan, how are you?
I'm very well. How's your week been?
My week's been okay. Sounds like it's been a good week on Pure.
It
I've
has,
been
yeah.
listening and great stuff. So great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Looking forward to some more new movies today. Now, I know that you texted me earlier and you talked about, you said you've got a rant you're probably coming up on a particular film you've seen.
Yeah,
I
shall
think we're
we
all looking
start
forward
with that
to
and get it out of the way?
that. We can if you're ready.
Okay, so do you remember last week we talked about a new film coming out starring Tom Hanks, which basically is set on one plot of land. So the film opens 10 million years ago, and we see dinosaurs racing across a plot of land. We then see the Ice Age wiping out the dinosaurs. We then move forward in time, and it's the same plot of land. The camera doesn't move. It's just looking at exactly the same view the whole time. And this is true for the whole film, apart from 1 minute at the end. So after the dinosaurs, after the Ice Age, we then see a Native American couple on this part of land, and she has a baby, and we see these Native Americans. Then, without the camera moving, we jump forward in time, same plot of land, and we see in the 1800s people digging up this land to make a way for a road and to make way for horse and carriages to go up and down it. And we discover that the big house that we can see in the distance is owned by Benjamin Franklin, famous American. Sorry, Benjamin Edison, brother of Thomas Edison. Let's get that right. Same view. We then jump forward in time and we see some children talking to some people who are down in a ditch on the same plot of land building a house. We then go right through to the present day where we see all the various owners of this house. So we see the owners in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 80s, and right up to the present day. The main story features on Tom Hanks' family. Tom Hanks plays a character called Richard. His mum and dad buy the house in the 50s. We see him as a young boy. We then see him growing up. We then see him getting his first girlfriend. His girlfriend becomes pregnant. They move into the same house with mum and dad, and we end up seeing them in their old age. Now, this sounded to me like a really intriguing idea, and I was really looking forward to it. The camera, say again, does not move the whole time. We are just looking at one view. And it's a 12A certificate. So I did just want to stress that. So fine. It's 12A certificate. We see through the window, the world changing outside. We see the world changing inside as, they get their first radio, then they get their first television, and we see the Beatles on the television. Then we see the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then we see the moon landing, and so on and so on. Okay. Now this is directed by Robert Zemeckis. Now Robert Zemeckis is a great director. He has made some really great films, including the Back to the Future trilogy, which I absolutely love. So I've got a lot to be grateful for Robert Zemeckis for. Tom Hanks, as we know, big star. Normally his films are reliable. Alan Silvestri did the music for this. Alan Silvestri, great composer. The problem is this. It is so boring and dull and uninteresting and frightfully sleep-inducing that for 104 minutes, as the stories played out in the predictable way they were always going to play out, because people live in houses, they have different furniture through the ages, they die, somebody else buys the house, they get a job, they die, somebody else buys the house, or the house is inherited by the children. Every now and again, we flip back. So squares appear on the screen. So a square might appear around the sofa, and we see what was on that spot 10,000 years ago. A square might appear around the television in the corner of the room, and we see what was on that spot 50 years ago. And we jump back and forth. It's non-linear, this film. But it is boring, it is dull, it is predictable beyond belief. And sitting there staring at exactly the same view for an hour and a half more just bored me. I thought this was going to be, it's based on a comic book. And I really thought, and I can imagine the comic book, it might work quite well. I haven't read the comic book, I haven't seen the comic book. I would imagine in a comic book, it works okay because you can flip the pages and you can, move forward. Sitting watching this boring, dull, predictable movie, and the acting is terrible. Now, I don't know if it's deliberate, but it's a long time since I've seen such bad acting. The script is awful. It's full of cliches, just one cliche after another about life and health and home and family and the joys and Christmas and all the rest of it, and Thanksgiving because it's set in America. Nothing happens for an hour. I was expecting some degree of, I was expecting to feel some sympathy for the characters. I was expecting to feel some love for the characters as it went on. I thought, any moment now, I'm really going to start caring for these characters. And then it came up with the end. And by the time the end arrived, I hadn't started caring for the characters. The de-aging of Tom Hanks is fine. I mean, we see they've used computer technology to de-age Tom Hanks. They've linked him up. The girl who plays his girlfriend is the same girl who he starred with in Forrest Gump, which was also directed by Robert Zemeckis. So there's a bit of a reunion going on here. Alan Silvestri also did the score for Forrest Gump. And credit to them for having a go at trying to do something different. Okay? But man, is it boring, is it dull? My friend Mark Kermode said that we are only in January and this is already a candidate for the worst movie of the year. And I have to say, I thoroughly agree with him. I mean, I've read a few reviews of and some of my friends have seen it and thought, quite liked it. Because it's original, because it's something different. And we've been moaning about the lack of originality in Hollywood. So credit to them for trying to do something different. And as I say, it's a 12 certificate, so there's really nothing offensive going on here. You can take the family to see it, but please don't. I mean, please don't, because you'll only encourage them to make more like this. The fact that the camera doesn't move an iota for an hour and a half is really weird. It's really, really weird. And it doesn't work because you end up just longing for a slight change. Move the camera to the left, move the camera to the right, go outside. Now, at the end of the film, the camera does actually sort of wheel through the front window that we've been looking at for an hour and a half and shows us the outside of the house. And we get 2 minutes of relief where we see the outside of the house and the camera sort of pans away up into the sky. And I was so glad it did because I wanted to join them up in the sky. By that stage, I was asleep. So really, I said to you last week, I was really looking forward to this because I love Tom Hanks and I like Robert Zemeckis. I think he's a great filmmaker. Made a film called Romancing the Stone, made Forrest Gump, as I say, made the Back to the Future trilogy. And I think Robert Zemeckis is a great filmmaker. In this instance, stick with the comic book. I mean, just, it comes up at the end, inspired by the comic book. And I thought, you know what, I don't even want to read the comic book. Maybe if I'd read the comic book first and then seen the film. But I didn't want to read the comic book because the comic book was this was just so dull. Anyway, it's the only 12A film that I saw this week. And so I wanted to mention it. But seriously, folks, you can do a lot better with an hour and a half of your life than sitting and watching the same view for an hour and a half without the camera. I mean, literally, the camera has obviously been screwed to the ground. It just doesn't move. And yeah, it's interesting to see the different fashions that the girls are wearing. It's interesting to see the different styles of furniture through the 1800s and the 1950s. And what fascinated me was what was on the television once TV comes in the 50s and, the Beatles and the moon landing and then all the way up through to sort of modern day. That kind of fascinated me. But honestly, the last couple who own the house are a black couple, and there's some talk about racism. But they are only on screen for 5-10 minutes. And yet that was probably the most interesting and significant part, an important part of the film. because you've got a young dad telling his young black son that probably he's going to experience some racism, and that's really fascinating. But honestly, Nathan, I was bored out of my brain. And I'd seen Mark's review, and Mark had said candidate for the worst movie of the year. And I went in thinking, it cannot be that bad. This is Tom Hanks. This is Robert Zemeckis. He was absolutely spot on. It is terrible. So ignore a film called Here. And I don't think it'll be, anyway, I don't think it'll have too much option because I don't think it will stay in cinemas much longer. It's not made the top 10.
Wow.
Whereas the film we're going to talk about next has come straight in at number 1.
Well, that is a bit of a disappointment, especially when you consider the actors and the person who did the score, the director. It seems a real shame.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what they were thinking. I think it was an experiment. I think it was, let's try this, let's see how it goes.
It's very creative.
Very creative idea, very good idea. I mean, originally this house was on a plot of land, as I say, where dinosaurs were roaming and then where native Indians were encamped. And then, where in the 1800s, a famous American lived, a famous inventor. So it is a good, solid idea. It's a great concept, but it doesn't work. It might work as a stage play, but then I don't have a clue how you would rearrange the sets. If you'd have to have a revolving stage, I think. I don't know how you do it. It might work as a stage play, but as a film, it's just boring. It's just static. And as I say, some of the acting, which really surprised me, is pretty poor. The dialogue is really weak. They don't talk as normal people talk. They talk as people talk in the movies, right all the way through the film. And it's just, no good.
Well, that is a bit of a shame, but there you go. You didn't find it particularly exciting, I guess, and maybe that's
It's not exciting. I mean, it is just literally, it cured my insomnia. I mean, literally, they should prescribe it in chemists once the DVD comes out as a cure for insomnia.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Andy. But you say the next one should be better.
Yeah, the next one is now. Let's just be clear. The next one's a 15 certificate for strong language, but this is the Bob Dylan biopic that we talked about. So
Yes.
we had a whole host of biopics. We won't list them again because we've listed them every week. So this is called A Complete Unknown and stars Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan. And basically, now I didn't know a lot about Bob Dylan apart from, as I said last week, I've been playing some of his music and I knew he recorded some gospel albums and so on. So this covers the period from 1961 to 1965. And in 1961, and Bob Dylan, by the way, approved the script of the film himself. So we know that what we're seeing on screen is pretty accurate. Bob Dylan said, yeah, they showed the script to Bob Dylan himself, and he said, yeah, go ahead and film it. So Bob Dylan played by Timothy Chalamet, who looks like Bob Dylan and sounds like Bob Dylan, and by the way, did his own singing. We know he can sing because he was in Wonka, which was a musical prequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He arrives in New York in 1961, and he's looking for Willie Guthrie. Now, Willie Guthrie is a big folk singer at the time, big star, big folk singer, but he's had a stroke, which has rendered him unable to speak. And Bob Dylan, being a young man in his late teens, being a fan, just wants to visit this guy and say thank you for the music. He finds him in a hospital, and sitting by his bedside is a guy called Pete Seeger. Now, Pete Seeger is was a big folk singer as well, huge star in the 60s in America. So he finds him, he goes in. Pete Seeger says to Bob Dylan, "Oh, you're carrying his guitar, give us a song." So he plays a song that he's written in the hospital, and Pete Seeger, this big folk star, this big recording artist as he was in the 60s, says, "Do you know what? This guy's got talent." And so he takes him into his own home. He gives him a home, he gives him a bed, and he begins to introduce him to the folk scene in New York. The result of that is that Bob Dylan eventually gets a recording contract, and he writes the song, "The Answer, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind," which we all know, massive hit, one of the biggest hits of all time. And Bob Dylan becomes a big star. But by 1965, which the film kind of jumps to, Bob Dylan has become fed up of playing folk music. Now, this is based on a book called Dylan Goes Electric, in which we get the story of how Bob Dylan went from being purely folk, purely acoustic guitar, acoustic guitar, and just playing without a band, just being to joining a rock band. And he plays the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, which was the biggest folk festival in America. And he comes on stage with his band and a shock horror and electric guitar, right? And starts playing. And people in the audience go nuts. They start throwing things at him. They start yelling at him. They start booing him.
Oh dear.
A couple of people famously, but this actually happened in real life. It happened in Chicago, but in the film it happens at this folk festival in Newport. One woman famously shouted out Judas and called him a Judas because it seems that he's turned his back on pure folk music and is adopting. I think he was influenced by the Beatles. He was influenced by a few other bands like that. And he could begin to see that perhaps there was more money in rock music than there was in pure folk music. But the audience called him a Judas and turned on him. So the film covers those 4 years. At the end of the film, we get the obligatory stuff about the rest of his life. I mean, Dylan made 55 albums in total, including Gospel Train and the other
Wow.
gospel albums that he made. Timothy Chalamet is brilliant. He looks like Bob Dylan. He sounds like Bob Dylan. He's kind of doing an impression of Bob Dylan, but it works. No problem at all with him doing his own singing. Unlike Angelina Jolie, where she was a sort of mix of Maria Callas in that film. I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was a great film. It's a straightforward biopic. It's a really good film. It was kind of a bit lumpy in the middle. Kind of got a bit bogged down in the middle section where he's going through this sort of internal battle of, do I stick with folk music or do I turn to rock music? And that got a little bit lumpy and a little bit slowed the film down a little bit because we see the internal battle that's going on inside his head and this big decision he's got to make because he knows that he will lose a whole legion of fans by doing this. And at one point he meets up with Johnny Cash, and Johnny Cash, ironically, was playing the same folk concerts, but he was using an electric guitar, and nobody complained about Johnny Cash. It was just that Dylan had written, the Blowing in the Wind and some other great folk songs. And he says to Johnny Cash, he says, everybody just wants to hear Blowing in the Wind, and I'm fed up of singing Blowing in the Wind. And in fact, at one point, he's on stage with Joan Baez. She was a great folk star with whom he had an on-off relationship. And she says, we're now going to sing for you folk, Blowing in the Wind. And he just walked off stage. And so she sang it on her own. So it's a really revealing film if you're interested in the life of one of the most influential pop stars. And he really is one of the most influential. He went on to join, of course, the Traveling Wilburys, which is one of my favourite pop bands, and only released 2 albums, but one of my favourite pop bands of all time. I love the Traveling Wilburys stuff. But if you're interested in the life of this young man who had a great influence in rock music, it's really worth seeing. It's called A Complete Unknown, and I think that it will go on to. It's doing great business. I mean, it's coming to the UK box office straight at number 1. People have just gone to see this. The Oscars were announced today. The Oscar nominations were announced today, and Timothy Chalamet is up for Best Actor, and I can see why. So yeah, that's a good film. It's not a great film because, as I say, it's a bit boggy in the middle. Everything tends to slow to a really snail's pace in the middle of the film, and then picks up again towards the end. But you've got Austin Butler playing Johnny Cash, and of course he played Elvis Presley a few years ago in a film simply called Elvis. So it really interesting, and I didn't know a great deal about Bob Dylan. I really felt I came out knowing and understanding the man a great better now, and understanding why there was this sudden sort of shift in his music from pure folk to rock. So the other big hit, of course, was The Times They Are A-Changing. And again, he got fed up. He just got fed up. We know that some bands, they have a big hit. And one of the things I love about Bruce Springsteen and I've been to 4 Springsteen concerts, is that he doesn't seem to get fed up with singing Dancing in the Dark or Born to Run, because he knows that's the fans want to hear. Dylan got fed up with singing his big hits and was always striving for something new. So that's the second one, and we talked about that last week. The other one, should we just go on to one more?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, again, a 15 certificate, and I always like to emphasize this, the certificate for folk. But this is an action adventure film called William Tell. Now, there was a TV series that I vaguely remember in the 60s about the life and adventures of William Tell. The best way to describe William Tell, for those who don't know the history, he was in the 14th century, and he was kind of like a Swiss Robin Hood. In fact, they could have called this film William Tell, Prince of Thieves, if you remember the Kevin Costner film, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. So basically, we're in Switzerland, we're in 1388, and Austria, the King of Austria, played by Ben Kingsley, who's really hamming it up and doing the acting. There's an awful lot of acting going on in this film. He's the King of Austria. He wants to invade Switzerland and take it over. And the Swiss are fighting back. The Swiss are rebelling. And they eventually are led by William Tell, who, as I say, is a kind of Swiss Robin Hood. And there are some scenes in this film that almost seem to me to be lifted directly out of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. There's one scene where they're sort of invading a town, and he's planting his men, he's getting his men into the town, and secretly they're going in under the guise of different costumes and trying to get in to a town. And it's just like a scene in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I really enjoyed it. For me, it was the best film of the week. A lot of action going on. It's a bit bloodthirsty. That's why it's a 15 certificate. There's a lot of action going on. There's a lot of acting going on. A lot of over-the-top stuff. Connor, I was at an event in London on Monday night where Mark Kermode interviewed one of the actors in this film, a guy called Connor Swindells, who plays the baddie, the king's henchman, if you like. And he was saying that, they had great fun filming this. And it's meant to be fun. It doesn't have the humour of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I didn't laugh once, but it does have the action. It does have the adventure. It does have the sword fighting. And I really thought that it told the story well. I mean, the famous thing that we all know about William Tell is that he was forced by the bad guy to shoot an apple off his son's head. So this is the famous story of William Tell, that he was captured. They put his son up against a pole. They made him march 200 yards away, and they put an apple on his son's head and said, right, shoot the apple off his head. That scene is brilliantly staged. Absolutely brilliantly staged. We open with William Tell. We open with the son there with the apple on his head, and William Tell pulling the bow back, pulling the bow and arrow back, ready to fire. And then suddenly the screen goes dark and it says 3 days earlier. So, and then we build up back to that moment. But it's really brilliantly staged. Absolutely, really tense, really brilliantly staged. Again, the photography is straight out Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because we see the arrow head on, flying through the air. Great score by Stephen Price, who did one of my favourite scores of recent years for Last Night in Soho. I think that it is, and they've set it up for a sequel, because the King of Austria dies, his daughter takes the throne, and she vows vengeance on William Tell and his cohorts, and that's where the film finishes. So clearly they're hoping it was going to be a big success, and that there would be a big enough success to make a sequel. They've set it up beautifully, and I will go and see the sequel, because I had quite a good time watching this. So William Tell, action adventure, sword fighting, Robin Hood style stuff, 15 certificate, but it's okay. It's really okay. It's a good film.
Yeah, that sounds right up my street, to be honest.
Sorry?
That sounds right up my street, to be honest, that one.
Yeah, it's great. Good fun.
I mean, I remember I liked Prince of Thieves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Right. I thought it was excellent.
As I said, it doesn't have the humour of Prince of Thieves, but it does have the action and the adventure, and a similar sort of hero.
Yeah.
So if you like, Nathan, you will like it. If you like Prince of Thieves, you will like this one. I guarantee it. By the way, I don't know if you know, but out on Blu-ray, just as we're talking about that, there is an extended version of Prince of Thieves that they've recently released.
Oh, really?
with scenes that were taken out when it was released in the cinema, put back in. So have a look on Amazon or wherever. But there is an extended version of Prince of Thieves available now. I've got it, and it's really worth it. It explains a bit more about who you remember the witch that the sheriff's consulting
Ah,
in
yes.
Prince of Thieves. It explains a bit more about her background and who she is. But they took that out when the film was released, but it's back in now. So if you want to see an extended version, you can of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Yeah, well, if you like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, you'll like William Tell.
Excellent. Yeah.
Um, the only other one I saw this week was a werewolf film called Wolfman. We'll skip over it because really it wasn't very good.
Ah,
Lots of people I know are enjoying it. It was okay. A couple of films that are out today. So we've got a horror film called Presence about a haunted house. We've got an action and adventure movie called Flight. And this is a film about a US Marshal taking a prisoner by plane across the mountains. And it turns out the pilot's a bad guy and the plane crashes. I haven't seen it. I will report back on it next week. That looks good. Shall we mention a couple of films to see at home?
yeah, sure.
Okay, we'll move on then. So those are the films at the cinema. If you're into your history of pop music, definitely go and see Complete Unknown. If, like you like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, go see William Tell, but don't expect the humour or the lightness of touch that film had in places. So at home, there are some new films online. Actually, they're old films, but they've come on available online now. So the first one I want to mention is a World War II drama called Operation Mincemeat. Now, this is based on a true story, and there was a time during the Second World War when it looked like we might be losing, and we might be losing key plots of land. And what the British did was they found an unknown person who had died, a dead body. They dressed him up as a soldier. They chained a briefcase to his wrist with our plans for the invasion of Cyprus, which we were never going to do. They dropped him in a certain place where they knew he would be washed up on the shore. The enemy would find him, would see these plans, and hopefully would move their soldiers from one place to another, leaving us free to go in where there was the gap. So you get this. This was a really complicated plan that the high-ranking officers in the Second World War came up with. We will plant fake plans on a dead body. We will allow him to be washed up on shore in German territory. They will find these plans. Hopefully, they will think they were real. They will divert their attention elsewhere, and then we can go in behind them, kind of thing. The story is narrated by Ian Fleming, who was a war officer during the Second World War and, of course, went on to write the Bond books. It's a really super film. It's tense. The scene where we know that the Germans have found the dead body, but are they believing the fake plans? You know, these fake plans were found. They were sent all the way through to Hitler's HQ in Berlin. Will they believe us? Will they fall for it? Will they fall for our trap? You know, that we are sending them false information. And that scene is so tense. It just goes. There was a whole night when they had to wait to see if the Germans were actually going to fall for the trick. They've turned it into a musical. This in London. I haven't seen the stage play, but they've turned it into a musical. But it is a fantastic Second World War drama, and it's available now to stream. It's on Netflix. It's new on Netflix this week. And I saw it at the cinema, but I really loved Operation Mincemeat. I think it is one of those Second World War stories that deserves to be told, and that I didn't know. I mean, apparently there was an earlier film made about it in the 50s. I hadn't seen that film, and my brother, who's a historian, he knew about this trick that the English were trying to play on the Germans, giving them false information. And when they were preparing the dead body, they had to make sure that he looked like he'd been on a battleship and that he was a casualty. Well, when they were preparing the plans, they all had to be typed very carefully, and the paper had to be just the right paper, and it had to look like it'd been in the sea for several days and all the rest of it. They had to have a proper briefcase, military briefcase. the attention to detail was absolutely incredible. But it's a really, really good film. So that's on Netflix. If you like World War II dramas, it's a 12A certificate, Operation Mincemeat. And then also new on Netflix this week, and I really want to highlight this because this is one of my favourite films of the last decade. There is an animated film come out on Netflix. Again, I saw it at the cinema 10 years ago. It's called Song of the Sea. This is an Irish fantasy. It is about a young boy whose mother has died. He lives with his father in a coastal town near a lighthouse. His sister has met some fairies. As I said, it's a fantasy. They have turned her into a seal. So she's half human, half seal. But the fairies that have helped her and have befriended her have been captured by a wicked, evil magician. And the young boy and his sister, in the guise of the seal, have to go off and rescue her. It is beautiful. It is one of the most beautifully animated films I've ever seen. The colours are rich. The colours are deep. It's not Disney. We're not in a Disney world. We're almost in a photorealistic world. But the colours are deep. The sea is beautiful. The animation is beautiful. The music is stunning. I've got the soundtrack and I've played it so many times over the last 10 years. You wouldn't believe. It is a really, really beautiful film. It's new on Netflix. It's called Song of the Sea. You can sit down and watch this with your kids. You can sit down and this is the one this week to sit down and watch with your kids. Bowl of popcorn, sit with granny, whoever. Just enjoy it. It's slow. It's not action packed. There isn't a lot of great adventure, but there's a lot of sea whirling around and kaleidoscope type scenes, and the animation is absolutely glorious, and the colors are glorious, and it will draw you in to the story. It will just grab hold of you and pull you in. I thought Song of the Sea is terrific. It's one of them. I've got it on Blu-ray, and it is a film that I've watched many, many times and love it every time. It's from an Irish film company that specialises in animated films, and the music is sort of Irish. Again, Irish folk music. Actually, we're talking about Bob Dylan. It's Irish folk music, but it is absolutely just a beautiful film, and I was delighted to see that that's now on Netflix. And then just two classics again, animated films which are on the BBC iPlayer, because I think we should perhaps do this thing with the BBC iPlayer. Each week. Well, both Incredible films, The Incredibles, are on there, and you're smiling. They are both on the BBC iPlayer this week. So this family of superheroes, Mr. Incredible, Mrs. Incredible, and the children, battling the bad guys. Both Incredible films are on BBC iPlayer, so do look out for those and enjoy them.
Wow,
And
excellent.
I think that's it.
You think so? Lots going on.
Lots going on.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Yeah, lots going on in the world of cinema. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Lots of great films to watch, not only at home, but also in cinema. And yeah, thank you so much, Andy. Great to hear from you again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nathan. And look forward to next week.
Yeah.
We'll have a few more films to talk. We'll talk about this film Flight, which is an action adventure movie set in a plane that's about to crash with a bad guy on board and a criminal on board and a US Marshal on board. So I think that was one that was made during COVID, because you can always tell films that were made during COVID. It's got a cast of 3. So I think that was probably one that was made during the pandemic. Thanks, Nathan. God bless you. And God bless Pure. And look forward to next week.